All right, so you're listening to Vince Butler and Paul Lowe on 3WBC and another extended version of Breakfast in Bed. We have a guest with us this week, gentlemen, and I use that term completely well.
Thank you.
Peter Malliaros.
Good morning. How are you? Okay, so did you have anywhere you wanted to start? Or
No. Actually, I have no preconceived notions.
Okay.
Quite happy to have him on. So
thank you so much.
Because I know what you do and I know what you've done. And, why don't we start there? Why don't you explain why I feel warm and fuzzy towards you?
Thank you very much. All right. Well, look, in a nutshell, 5 years ago, we started a charity called Community, spelt with the U for umbrella, R for Roger.
Yep.
The idea of that is to do something for people at or below the poverty line. There's about 5 million of them, I believe, at the moment.
In Australia?
Yeah. That's a lot of people.
Gee whiz, yes.
What's crazy about that is...
Well, we've only got, 24
5.5 million. Yes, that's not good.
1 in 5.
Okay, that's 20%. Okay.
Yeah. And what's even crazier is that's how many had to get food from Food Bank last year on a regular basis.
Wow.
Up from 3.5 million the year before, which just to give you a bit of a comparison. So it's not heading in the right direction, unfortunately.
And probably will with the Liberal government, to be honest.
Yeah, well, this is the other reason we're here to have a bit of a chat to your listeners today, to inform them about what we're doing about that as well, actually.
Oh, okay.
So back to the charity. 5 years ago, we started a charity, and the idea was there's an issue with distribution. In other words, people don't have enough food, don't have enough clothes, don't have whatever it is that their issue is because of they're at or below the poverty line. That's what our aim was, to try and help them with that. But obviously, being such a big area, poverty, we had to pick an area that we focused on, and we started focusing on meals and food insecurity.
Yep.
So we developed a meals program it's called Feeding Australia, and we're providing anywhere up to 1,000 meals a week for people at this point.
Wow.
So that started about 3 years ago, and it's been growing ever since.
Okay.
So we're pretty happy about where that's gone. We're now moving into Canberra and shortly into Queensland. So we're going to be replicating that program in those two states as well. So look, we're very happy with how that's progressing. But unfortunately, as you know, during our journey the last 5 years, we've become aware that the problem isn't just a distribution issue. It's actually a structural issue with our democratic model, our social model, and our economics model. I suppose the best place to start is, what does that mean?
Yep.
What does that actually mean? So, look, the best way to explain it is if 1,000 of us just got together and said, look, we want to start a community, all right? The first thing we'd probably all agree on is, look, we want equal opportunity and an equal voice on things. I mean, that's a pretty standard kind of thing. This is why we get
into trouble with a lot of politicians with that attitude.
And I intend to. The bottom line is, if we use that as the benchmark, as in equal opportunity and equal voice for all, right, and then look around at the different systems we've put in place to achieve that and protect that, well, what do we got? With democracy, you've got the ballot, the vote, right?
Yes.
And representative government.
Yes.
All right. Unfortunately, with representative government, what we do is every 3 years we go to the ballot and we give someone our power of attorney, which basically gives away our rights to anything. Yes. They go away for 3 years and do whatever the hell they want. Sorry, did I yeah, shouldn't say that.
That's
anyway, and then every 3 years, we go back and do the same thing again.
Yes.
All right. There is a better way. And we'll talk about that shortly. But that's one area that's structurally flawed. And that's one of the reasons, that's key reason why Mr. Morrison can go off and do whatever he wants and get away with it.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
And that's not democracy. But bottom line is that's what we have now. And a very simple tweak, we could get back to democracy as it should be. Now, that's the first problem. The second problem is the legal system. Now, legal system is actually nothing wrong with the legal system, actually. It's designed well. It works well. Only problem there, of course, is if you don't have the funds to utilise this resource, you kind of you can't use it, really. That's it, or to a very limited degree, obviously.
Yes.
The final one is the market. You'd create a marketplace so you could trade things amongst each other. And that's good and well. That's not a problem with that. Except let's look at it from the perspective of a company. Now, if we all started a company and had shares in this company, in order for us to achieve equal say on what goes on, we'd each have to have equal amount of shares. Would that be fair?
That would be a fair... Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, currently in the world, and we'll get back to Australia, 97% of the shares are owned by 30% of the individuals. So it's equivalent to the 1,000 people that we talked about to start with.
Okay.
300 of them owning 97% of the assets in this company, and the rest of us, the other 700, have only 3% shares.
Although that's muddied somewhat because, I've actually sort of thought
please.
deeply about this area myself previously. I think the biggest shareholder these days are the superannuation funds, which is sort of our money anyway, but we don't get any voting rights on that.
That's not actually correct. 1% of the population on the global scale now, right, own 50% of the shares.
Well, that's always been the case.
But my point is, if you get back to the original premise of each of us having a say, right?
Yep.
We all need to have equal amount of shares. Do you see how that works? Now,
I can see how it would be ideal, but the trouble is...
How do you do that? How do you achieve that?
People don't want to take a minority shareholding if they're investing money in something.
Forget the money invested for a second, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about having equal say in our community, in our voting system, in our democracy.
Yep.
All right?
Yep.
All right. For that to occur, we all need to have equal amount of power. I suppose that's what bottom line it buys. It buys the amount of shares you have in a company or in our democracy buys you a certain amount of power, a certain amount of say.
Influence.
What happens? Influence.
Yeah,
Influence.
This is where I have a difference of opinion because, in my opinion...
Yes, please.
What we have is, unfortunately, a society where businesses who don't have a vote in politics get to lobby politicians and give money and
Isn't that
the
same thing, though?
Well, yes, in practice.
Yeah.
In theory, though, in theory, the politicians should be beholden to only the shareholders, not people who give them money and curry favour.
Absolutely. And that's what we're about as well. So I suppose the point of all this, as an intro, is to set this discussion up for yourselves and listeners.
Yep.
What we're about is equal opportunity for all.
Yep.
All right. Now, the only way to get from where we are now, and by the way, in Australia, in the Australian context, we are actually better than the global context.
Absolutely.
Although
we've got much worse over the last.
But we are getting worse, unfortunately. A report that just came out recently from ACOS about inequality in Australia points to that.
Yes. I'm not surprised.
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
Surprised at all.
So, all right. So, where are we? So, 5 years ago, we started the charity. And we started with the distribution of meals, and we are where we are today.
Yes.
Along the way, we've realised there's a structural issue with our democracy, our economics, and our legal systems. Okay, but again, you need these other two to make that accessible.
It's all based on the amount of money you have access to.
And assets, etc. Yes. So what we did is we're starting a political party called UrReferendum.
Okay.
U for umbrella again, R for Roger, referendum. And you can look us up on urreferendum.org.au. All right.
Okay.
And so the platform is very simple. Equal opportunity for all, but the way we achieve it is different to every other party that's out there. Now, if you look at the major parties that are out there, we've got obviously the Liberals, we've got Labor, we've got Nationals, and we've got the Greens. Okay.
And some various
minor parties who kind of...
strange parties.
Yeah, sorry, how can I forget, One Nation. My apologies. But anyway, but you're right.
Especially when you get to the Senate. There's some
absolutely
very, very interesting. At least we're not as interesting as the British system where they have the raving loony party. And
we do have some interesting ones here too, don't we?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to mention names.
No. But look, the main difference between, let's say, all the parties mentioned and us, other than the Greens, is they're all for coal mines and coal factories, etc., factories run by coal, etc., right? The Greens are the only ones who've gotten up there and said, look, we need to go to renewables.
Yes.
We need to change our model so that, hey, we're around in the next 10, 20 years. And look, obviously I'm talking about climate change now. But it's interesting because since I've started going in this direction, I've gotten up to Twitter and I've got some very interesting... There's a lot of support, obviously, for that direction from the majority. And there's some interesting comments from some who believe that climate change is a myth or some sort of...
it's odd watching these people argue. And I get a bit perplexed myself because I know the science, and the science is that we need to do something about the climate.
Absolutely. And we've got 10 years to do it in.
And it's urgent.
Yes.
It should have been done 10 years ago, if anything.
Yes.
Well,
according to the UN report,
scientists do it with dispassion. They study it, they refer it, they write reports about it, and they publish it, and they critique it.
Yeah.
And if you can trust anything in life, it's
you trust them before you would a
politician. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
But you watch politician after politician saying, "Well, I don't know much about climate change. I don't know the science, but I know what I feel about it." And they talk about how they don't want to change because it's much more expensive to go to renewable resources, which, from what I understand in the last few reports, is untrue anyway.
Correct.
It's actually cheaper to use solar and wind and that sort of thing. And the other thing is they're doing it to just support a couple of thousand jobs. Well, it's sort of like, they're doing this strange major thing to support a minor number of people who could be redeployed, in our society, like they've done with other things previously.
Absolutely.
And I don't understand where they're coming from because people, their constituents are getting angry about this.
Totally. Look, I think anyone... I've just taken on this sort of philosophy of anyone who basically jumps on Twitter and says anything like pro or anti, they don't believe climate change is real. I just ask them, well, what do you...
Where's your proof?
Well, not even that. Before we even go there, it's what do you actually... What happens to you? How does this affect you if we reduce emissions? I mean, and that happened to someone I was speaking to last week, and she fessed up she owns, I don't know who this person is, but apparently she has 789 employees around Australia working in, she wouldn't say. She wouldn't say because she didn't feel that she wanted to divulge that information, but it was definitely creating emissions that would not be favourable to her image. That's what I got out of it. But the bottom line was that makes sense. That's why she doesn't want to get out of it. Yeah, totally. So I say self-interest is an interesting animal, and I think that's the answer. If there's self-interest there, that's probably what's occurring and why these people are advocating to stay in.
Well, they've obviously got a very, very loud voice, disproportionate to the voting population. Which
gets back to what we were talking initially.
Yes.
About money and assets.
Yes.
All right. So, like, for instance, yesterday they voted out the new amendment to pollies for...
corruption.
Corruption. Yeah. Now, what's interesting about that is one vote out, I believe, and imagine if we gave that vote to the people in Australia, the actual board of Australia. Do you think? I think the outcome would have been slightly different. I think.
Absolutely. I'm being an ex-IT person.
Yeah,
I've got to call myself that these days. Being an ex-IT person, I've always thought maybe there's a better way of doing this.
There is, absolutely.
From a technological point of view, where we could all vote on
key issues.
issues like this, the actual dissemination of information to it. Although, here's the difficulty, of course. I perceive that with today's access to social media, that we have silos of information.
Yes, agreed.
And people believe the strangest things. And I know, I mean, I've got family who believe in the strangest things, and it doesn't matter what I say to them, they won't believe me. But then that's sort of been the case for many, many years anyway, even before social media. Some people think, believe in conspiracy theories and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But now with social media, they get to feel empowered about it.
At least they can get it out and have a bit of a chat amongst themselves about it.
Well, they create silos of misinformation.
Yeah.
And you see it in all sorts of areas. You see it in especially food, the belief in superfoods and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Cures of medical problems. Conspiracy theories about the Jewish conspiracy of taking over the world. Yep. God knows why they'd want it, but anyway.
I don't know, but hey. Look, I think you're right.
Sounds like too much hard work.
Look, I think we really... Look, it gets back to, again, getting back to that... If we just could put that up as the gold standard, equal voice, equal opportunity for all, and anything that basically we want to put in place has to pass the filter of does it actually bring us closer to that ideal or not. I think we'd be a lot better off than we are now.
But we'd have to disseminate the information. This is sort of what I'm trying to get at.
I agree.
We have to make sure that the information we get is accurate and not contaminated by
anything or anyone.
Well, the trouble is that you need alternative viewpoints anyway. So
how do you do that?
It's all grey. There's almost nothing in politics that's black and white, or in life really. But we need to get credible information somehow to people who could then make informed decisions.
Well, let's look at that for a moment, all right? How do pollies get to the point where they actually debate, even get the information to start the debate amongst themselves?
Well, usually they get experts.
Correct. They've got committees.
Think tanks and
they create a committee.
Yep.
And the committees go off and do their research, get experts in, get public opinion in, et cetera, all right? And then they form a paper with some recommendations.
Yep.
All right? And then that gets taken to the pollies, and then they have a bit of a punch up amongst them, dust up amongst themselves, and then something either happens or it doesn't.
Yep.
Basically, right? So my point, and what we're advocating for, is why couldn't we reverse this? See, let's get the frame right. The government should be seen as a CEO of the company, all right? They've got the responsibility of actually operationally implementing what the board want.
True.
All right? Now, the board being, of course, the Australian public.
They also decide the policies as well.
That's where it's fallen apart.
Yeah.
All right? So this is my point. They shouldn't be. This is where operational and policy making have gotten all muddled up in politics.
Yep.
Whereas if you ran it just like we do in any standard company, where you've got that separation.
Well, that's how they do it in America. And I mean, I've got to say that they've shown that it can be pretty flawed itself.
But that's another component. All right, and that gets back to the asset distribution.
Yep.
All right, but let's look at the one component for starters, and not the market component, but just the democracy component, right? If we just flipped that around and said, for all major policies, okay, these committees would go off and they'd do their whatever they do, or as per normal, right?
Yep.
Once they create that report, they could still go to the houses and get debated until everyone's happy with whatever. But the 2 or 3 recommendations would then be put to a vote by the Australian public.
Yes.
And really simply, we would get to decide which policy, which is supposedly the 2 or 3 best options for whatever the issue is, we want implemented.
Yep.
All right? And then the government has a responsibility to go off and do it. It's really that simple.
That is true. However, not forgetting the checks and balances.
But we've already done that piece by having that debate and having the input from the government, from the community, and from the experts.
But if the executive decide to go on their own, there is a potential that somebody needs to step in. Mm-hmm. And if everybody's a voter...
You're talking about the Australian people now are voting for which policy they want, right? Yes. Then how...
But what if the executive don't follow the policy? What if they go off on their own little...
Let me ask you this. What would happen in a current company if the executive did that? What would the board do to them?
Depends whether they could justify themselves or not.
Correct. But the point is, as the board right now, the Australian public are watching the shipwreck, which is the current government, commit... but the point is, sorry.
Sorry, I had to. I had to go offline there and just say something at the moment.
But the bottom line is that what say do we have right now?
None. In fact, we have less than none.
Correct. And worse than that,
they seem to be actively working against what people want.
Correct. Worse than that, though. With all these new bills that are coming in on board, the religious freedom bill and the anti, you can't even go out there and say, well, I'm not happy anymore, or that's what they're trying to do.
Yes.
At what point does Australia say, you know what, actually, we've got this all backwards. We need to be the ones telling you guys what we want, and you need to implement it. Otherwise, you're out of a job.
That's true.
Okay. That's what we're advocating for. It's really pretty simple, isn't it, when you think about it? So UrReferendum and the Greens are the only parties that I'm aware of at this point that are actually listening to the people and saying, yep, that's what we'll do.
And that's very unfortunate because traditionally I've been a Liberal voter.
Yep.
I've got to say.
I was too for many years.
They've really alienated me over the last, 10 years. They prove that they don't listen and they're not competent and they're driving this very ultra-nationalist campaign.
Yep.
And I find it, how can I say? There's not a lot you can say.
No.
I find it anti-competitive and racist, and it seems that there's a very small minority, even of the Liberals, that are running the show.
And it definitely doesn't pass the equal opportunity and equal voice for all, does it?
No.
All right.
No.
So,
but I find the Labor Party's going down the same track as well.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
The Labor Party's now more right-wing than the Liberal Party of 10 years ago.
I would have hoped that we had a real opposition, but you're right, it doesn't appear to be the case at this point.
Yeah.
Now, the Greens are the only ones, and this is, as you say, unfortunate, because... The problem with the Greens is how...
I don't like some of their policies, though.
But the point is, if you compare apples for apples, I'd rather the Greens than Liberal or Labor at this point.
I don't know. I'm interested in seeing what the latest guys...
Which one are you referring to? Just out of curiosity. What policy is troublesome?
Just some of the things they've said over the years about how they want things done, where... environment trumps every other concern.
No, it doesn't.
There's a balancing act there.
Absolutely.
And they may be right. They may be wrong.
Yes.
It's handy to have experts that you can have on tap to discuss the issues and nut it out.
Absolutely, yep.
Because I'm not an expert on climate change or greenery or whatever. But it'd be nice to have the experts in there debating the core issues and deciding, rather than a bunch of politicians who are, like me, probably less competent, and who are making decisions on behalf of everybody without expert consultation. Agreed.
So right now, let's get that out of the way as well. With regards to climate change, the two reasons I've heard that I've been able to ascertain as to why some people don't believe, it's either they don't believe that climate change is real, or they don't believe that our small 1.4 or whatever it is contribution amounts to very much.
That's ridiculous.
But that doesn't take into account the amount of coal we're exporting.
Yes.
That impact that's having.
Oh, I was watching. From my exciting day, I was watching Parliament the other day, and there was when you're studying and trying to get an assignment in, sometimes anything will distract you.
Yep.
But there was one of Matthias Cormann, who's one of the worst in Parliament as far as his attitude's concerned.
Yes.
Was saying that it was cheaper and easier to use coal, and it's good for the environment if we export our superior coal to the rest of the world. That just about had me choke on my... It's sort of like, hang on, how can it be better for the world if any coal's being burned?
No, look, it's crazy.
And where's his sources for such information? It's sort of like...
Mr. Morrison, sorry.
Well, anyway. It's interesting how much he's publicly changed about that. He's gone from, a couple of years ago, putting a lump of coal on the desk in Parliament, saying this is the future, we don't have to be afraid of it, to now backpedaling on all the coal stuff, but we can't afford not to do without it because, we'd fall in a financial heap without coal.
Now, this is where it brings us to the final piece, which is your referendum, and why we thought compelled to actually start a new party rather than support or get involved with another party.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about democracy.
Yes.
All right. And how we could improve it.
Well,
right.
I really think somebody should look into that. I don't know what the possibility of changing our democracy is like.
Easy. You basically get the majority of Australians voting for someone who advocates for that.
Australians don't vote. That's the thing. Majority of Australians are conservative.
Yes, agreed.
And will not vote for change unless it's bloody
absolutely
obvious.
Necessary. And guess what?
We barely gave the Aboriginals a vote in their own country.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's
I got that question 2 days ago from someone on Twitter. Well, not for me, but just generally. So my answer to that is, back to what we said earlier. Every 3 years, we go to the polls. We give somebody our power of attorney, so they can go off and do whatever they want without any input from us, really.
Yep.
And then 3 years later, after we come back and look at the disaster they've created and pick somebody else and then repeat the process. Now, how can anybody get excited about that process?
Well, exactly.
All right.
The only thing is that we're forced to vote. So unlike a lot of countries, in fact, most countries, I think, we don't not vote if we don't think anybody's good enough.
So what happens if we switched it around and gave everyone an actual real voice where once a month, just like you do in a board, you'd have a board meeting where basically we'd set aside a day. Here, there you go. When we get elected, you get 1 day off a month to actually vote for policies that are important to the country. How's that? That should get me a couple of votes. But the point is that if we did that...
Yeah, but then you have to concentrate on politics for a whole day.
or have a barbie, if you prefer. The point is, it wouldn't be compulsory. The only thing that would be compulsory is every 3 years you'd have to vote for someone, right? But what I'm saying is...
Executive,
once a month, you could join in and get your voice heard. Now, most people, I believe, eventually would. And you know why? Because if you don't, you'll have groups of people who would prefer this policy over that policy, and if you don't get your voice heard, guess what? That'll win. It's an interesting idea, isn't it?
It's interesting, and it does...
As long as the only policies that are being put forward are the best options as opposed to... And remember, these are all being put together by the committee and the experts that are putting together reports anyway. So nothing there is changing, all right? Except we're using best science, best advice, and to come up with the best solutions, and then all we're really choosing is which solution do we prefer, really. Then, because I agree, as an Australian, to try and be an expert in every area is not going to happen.
No.
Which is why we've gone to representative government to start with, because we kind of felt, well, these guys must know more than we do, or at least they kind of made us believe they did. And
that's supposed to be their full-time job. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But how in your model do you stop undue influence?
Well, yeah, good. That's a brilliant question. Okay, so everything that gets us to the final piece. All right. Now, I'll answer that slightly roundabout because I need to get back to something first. Remember a few years ago when, bit more than a few years ago, we used to own Telstra, or government did, and everything else, right? And then what they did, they privatised.
Yes.
All right. And
that was a Labor government, as I remember.
Well, here's the thing. You know, on one hand, I agree with the fact that public assets shouldn't be owned by the government because they're not.
It's certainly been proved that in certain circumstances, private enterprise is more efficient at running these things.
Correct, but that's not what I'm referring to. If you look at what socialism and communism is basically the state owning everything, correct, and controlled by the government, right?
Yep.
So obviously that's not what we are. We're actually a mixed economy, democracy, etc. So with that in mind, all right, what we really should have done is created a cooperative, right? All the assets should have been handed over to the cooperative. Each Australian should have had one share in that cooperative. So we all own a piece of all the utilities, all the whatever it was, Telstra, whatever it was that was actually offloaded. All right. Yeah. Then you have this division between government, business, and public interest.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
But here's the difference that would also have made. The public would still have the power or the assets or the influence to actually have a say on what goes on.
Okay.
And that's exactly what our model is.
Yep.
We are creating a cooperative. When we get into government, we will basically do one of two things. We will fix... You've heard of tragedy of the commons, where basically economically something is just not profitable so that nobody does anything with it unless government puts some money into it.
Yep.
All right? We can see Australia littered, the world littered with tragedies of this type.
Yeah,
right? And what our model does is it creates a balance of sorts so that it brings things back into equilibrium, right? By creating this cooperative where you anywhere there's a market failure, which is basically a product or service is not being made available, even though it's needed, all right, because of monetary constraints, and we can get into some examples in a minute, right? Or there's a supply chain break, so somewhere in the chain, it's just not enough of it. We will create a community enterprise which will fill the gap, fill the void. Okay. All right. Now think about that for a second and its potential. There are currently 715,000 unemployed in Australia, roughly, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Imagine if we could utilise this group in a community enterprise, right, to fix market failures across Australia. I'll give you another example. The firefighters of recent days, they left their jobs to go out and fight the fires, right? In our model, they would have been part of our community enterprise being paid $1,633 per week to do that job. See, what we're advocating for is... by the way, where did I get that number from?
Yeah.
That's actually the Australian current average weekly earnings average.
Okay.
All right. So essentially, 85,000 roughly per annum is what the average Australian is earning. I know that's not correct. Obviously, there's quite a bit of discrepancy between high and low.
Absolutely.
However, in our model, that's what somebody working in that community, in our community enterprise, would earn.
Yep.
All right. So all of these 715,000 unemployed would be employed in a community enterprise that was providing a benefit to the community.
Okay.
They would be paid $1,600 per week, which is the 85,000.
Something like maybe a public service organisation?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
I can get behind that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm talking about. If you look at this, we've got 75,000 charities currently going off and doing all sorts of things, wonderful things.
Yes.
Why do they exist?
Why do they have to exist?
Why do they have to exist? So essentially, we're giving them another name called a community enterprise so it's clear on what the purpose and what they're doing, right? We're housing all the assets and everything they do under the cooperative model.
Yes.
So it belongs to all of us.
Yes.
Right? We all get a say. And you have a choice, very simply, either working for business, so you're working for a profit or for profit, or you're working for the community.
Yep.
That's it, really simple. And then you've got the government, who basically is responsible for implementing policies that have actually been voted on by the majority. Now, really, that it's pretty basic to me. That's how we could move forward in a way that is a small enough incremental change to be acceptable by most people, because you really haven't changed things that much. You're just using what's already there and just adjusting them so that it's more democratic, it's more equal, and everyone gets a voice.
Yes.
All right. So we were very careful when designing our model so that would be the case, because we are aware of how conservative Australians can be, and rightly so. Rightly so.
No, I'm thinking about the model, because I've been fairly interested in this thing called the universal basic income.
Yep.
And I've watched the studies of it. They're doing a study in America, and they're doing a study in Finland, from memory.
Yes.
I think that was actually the initial study done there, where basically they take all the money that's given away to people on social security, so pensioners, unemployed, invalids, a whole range of people, single mothers, whatever. And if you take out the administration side of it, and basically you have enough money left over that you can pay everybody 30 grand a year, or
whatever it is,
whatever it is, 25 grand a year,
Yep.
as a universal basic income. Takes no or little administration, just basically send out a cheque or whatever
into the account
every week or whatever.
Yes.
And then you can do what you like. You can work for business. You obviously have some knowledge of this.
Yes.
That would actually dovetail into what you're saying.
It does.
Quite neatly.
It does, which kind of brings us to the next subject matter. I don't know if you wanted to take a break before we did that, but no.
Well,
fine.
we've been going 3/4 of an hour, so just to give your voice a break, we might take a break if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right.